permission to everybody.
It's recording.
Oh, perfect. Alrighty, cool. Alrighty. So his story, it's it's history, and it expands about 1600 years of that history. So I know a lot of us have grown up around the Bible and doing being in Sunday school or church for a lot of time. What are some Old Testament stories or events that we are all kind of familiar with, like that we sang about in high school? Let's just note some of these down and try and sort of place them in the timeline. So just yell out to me.
Noah's Ark.
No, yep, good. Yep, cool.
I'm trying to think of else.
Adam and Eve.
Yeah, that's it.
And then, yep.
Cain and Abel.
Yep.
Sodom and Gomorrah.
There we are.
Imagine it, Jody.
Creation in 6 days.
Yeah.
The Tower of Babel, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Moses.
Samson.
Yeah, cool. Samson. I spelled that wrong.
Adam.
What else have we got? Got that one? Yep, Adam and Eve. Yep. How about think of all the songs that we used to sing? Abraham.
It's with Abraham, yeah, 10 Commandments. And
Jonah. Well.
Yep.
Joseph and his multicolored coat.
Yep.
It's David and Goliath. Is that from the Bible?
Yep, perfect, of course, yep.
Yeah.
Only a boy named David.
All the
Who else can I think of?
been
Who was
built.
that?
James. All the times the temple has been built and the tabernacle.
Yep.
All those.
Sure.
What about Ruth? Was Ruth Old or New Testament?
Yeah. Have a look in your content page and might tell you, but that's a good one.
Of course, there's Esther.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Jonah and the whale.
Yeah, we've got Jonah and the whale down here.
Okay.
Cool. Alrighty, that's pretty good start, I suppose. Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of these things, and we're going to try and tie them all together. What do they have to do with each other, and what do they have to do with Jesus? So I'm just going to put those aside for a minute, and we can revisit those at the end. The Bible essentially can be divided up into 3 simple parts. Okay. So the first is Genesis 1 and 2. Can anyone tell me what happened in Genesis 1 and 2?
God created the heavens and the earth.
Yeah, perfect. So we've got creation.
And people.
That's good, creation.
God engaged
So
in
God,
the world's biggest engineering and construction project ever
Would
known
you
for
like-
mankind.
which you like, Andrew, because you are an engineer. So God created humans. Okay, He placed them in a garden. Yep, and then He walked with them in the garden. His presence was with them, and they lived a really sort of blessed life. Presence, if you can. Blessed life. Okay, it's pretty blissful. The second part of the Bible, Genesis 3. Can anybody tell me what happened in Genesis 3?
The Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve and temptation and turning away from God.
Yep, perfect.
We
Yep.
dug it
So
up, basically.
that's right. So we know that as the fall, don't we? Okay, the fall, where humans essentially turned away from God and sin came into the world. Cool. And then the third part we can divide it up to is Genesis 4 all the way to Revelation 22. And this is trying to get back to Genesis 1. To Genesis 1. Okay? So that's kind of the 3 simple ways to divide things up. So I'm just going to lay that aside for a second. Couple of more characters. So we got Genesis 6. You have Noah, okay, as we mentioned before. Okay, and Noah's Ark. So we know the story that so after Adam and Eve were banished from the garden, from God's presence because of sin, we had Cain and Abel, their children. Cain murdered Abel, first murder. Sin is infecting all the generations. You have Noah, who was a righteous man amongst a whole bunch of people who were sinful. God decides to start again with Noah and this family. He sends a flood. he saved Noah and his family and 2 of every kind of animal, and essentially to start again, to try and make the world, I guess, a better place. But the problem was that Noah's not perfect either. No sooner had Noah came out of the ark and planted a vineyard, he then got drunk, he exposed himself, which is not a great thing to do. He had 3 sons, okay? So his youngest, no, I don't know his youngest. One of his sons called Ham, who incidentally I think is the ancestor of the Chinese people. Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, Ham, sort of gossiped about that rather than covering up his father, so that was also sinful. And then his other brothers, Shem and Japheth, had to sort of deal. Japheth, I think I spelled that wrong. Have to deal with it. So that's Noah and his family. They were good, but definitely not perfect, and the cycle of sin keeps going on. Genesis 11. You have the Tower of Babel, as Jodie mentioned. People grow numerous again in the world, and they start using technology. So they were engineers from pretty early on. They decided to learn how to make bricks and build with bricks instead of stone, and to construct a tower to get to the heavens to knock the bastard off, in the words of Sir Edmund Hillary when he got to the top of Mount Everest, and essentially just sort of get up to God and be God themselves, which is similar to what I suppose Adam and Eve were trying to do when they took the forbidden fruit, in a sense. God is not happy with this, as you can imagine, and he changes them to be speaking different languages, and he disperses them. So this is the origin of languages and the dispersal of man. Okay, so it's a little intro. This is when we start to get to a particular family. So in Genesis 12, we get Abraham, or Abram, I suppose he was called to start off with. I thought we'll just call him Abraham for today. I won't get you to turn the Bibles, but I wonder if you guys can see this. And I wonder if someone might read for me Genesis. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Genesis
Yeah.
12. Yeah, Genesis 12, verses 1 to 3. Can somebody read that for me?
I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you.
Awesome, cool. So just the verse 1, the Lord had said to Abraham to leave his country and go to this land that he will show him. Thanks, Miguel. And then let's just move over to the side. Can you just read verse 7 for me, Miguel? You got that there? No? All right, I'll read it. So the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. So we don't have time to kind of cover like the whole chapter or the whole bit of this, but essentially it focuses on Abraham and his family. So the Lord appears to Abraham and he makes essentially to him 3 promises. Okay, put this here. So God promises to him to make him into a great nation, okay, and give him a great people, okay. And then the second promise to him is that he would give him the land, okay, that he will show him. And the third is that he would bless him and that he would be a blessing to others. And the flip side of that is that everyone who curses him, they would be cursed as well. So these are the 3 promises that we're going to focus in on through the timeline of the Bible. So I'm just going to put it to the side, but if you can just sort of either note that down or remember it, when we come to the point in the story where you think one of these or some of these promises have been fulfilled, just yell out or type in the chat box and see if you can identify that. And hence they are fulfilled in that order. Okay, so you've got these 3 promises that God will make Abraham a great nation, he would give him the land, and he would bless him, and then he would be a blessing to others.
Hey, Esther,
So, yes.
can we make contributions? Because
Yeah.
I'm thinking of something that might help some people.
Sure.
I feel like when the fall happened and that promise happened with the seed of the woman crushing the head of the snake, after the devil heard that, he went after the seed, which is like humanity, and he wanted to corrupt us. And so every time that God had to start again, like with the ark, he had corrupted humanity to the point where it had almost been destroyed so that the Messiah would never be born and could not redeem anyone. So I think that that's a good focus to have as well, because if humanity is corrupted, then Jesus cannot be born, and then he can't redeem anyone. So
So you're saying like the devil always tries to interfere with God's plans when he selects somebody, then the sin in that person kind of shows itself a bit more.
I think that goes without saying. The devil's always interfere with God's plan.
Yeah, that that essentially we're sinful, and that kind of shows for all the generations, and that is the devil trying to attack the seed of the woman, which is all humans. I'm not sure James, I'm not really hearing you, even though you don't look like you're on mute.
maybe I can put my mic up.
There we are. Yeah.
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 Hopefully that was helpful.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's definitely a good point. And I probably brushed over that bit. But yeah, that was definitely a promise to Adam and Eve that in the end God would send somebody, but the devil would always be after them. Okay, so let's go back to this. We're going to start to do a bit of a family tree here. So we'll see how we go. Okay, so Abraham. Okay. Here. Who was Abraham's wife?
Sarah?
Sarah. Very good. And who were Abraham's sons? Or sons?
Isaac.
Isaac, yep. Did he have Isaac first?
No.
No.
His daughter, didn't he?
Ishmael.
Don't know. He had a son called Ishmael. So what happened was Abraham was getting old in years. So was Sarah, his wife. She's probably past menopause, I suppose. And they had no kids, which is not a good idea or not a good start if you're going to be the father and mother of a great nation. So Sarah had a great idea and said to Abraham, hey, sleep with our servant girl called Hagar. Okay, have a child through her, and then through them, hopefully we're gonna become a great nation. Okay, so Abraham did as he was told, and the result was Ishmael. Okay, so that was actually his sort of firstborn son, Ishmael. But God said, look, the promises aren't going to be fulfilled through Ishmael. I'm going to make your name great through your biological son, through Sarah. Interestingly enough, Ishmael is the ancestor or the father of the Arabs, who are now, like, I suppose, the majority of the Muslim world are Arabs. So you can kind of see the rivalry between potentially the Arabs and the Israelites or the Jews. So it is true when the Muslims or the Arabs say that Abraham was their father, because actually through Ishmael he kind of was. Yeah. So Abraham then after that had a son with Sarah, and of course his name was Isaac. Okay. And this was the line through which God would fulfill his promises. So Isaac's wife was Rebecca. Okay, and who was Isaac's sons? Who were Isaac's sons?
Was it Jacob and Esau?
That's right, Jacob and Esau, and they were twins. Okay, so Esau was the oldest one, and Jacob was the younger one. Now in those days, the oldest one would really get the blessing and kind of carry on the family line, the family tradition, and the inheritance. But Esau was sort of the hunter-gatherer, the manly one, Rebecca favored Jacob, who was sort of more of the, I don't know, the one who liked to stay at home and cooked and maybe a bit more of mummy's boy. And so one day Esau came home from being in the fields and was super hungry. And as all men do, think that they're dying when they're actually just hungry. And he said to Jacob, who was doing MasterChef practice in the tent, "Hey, bro, give me some of your food." And Jacob, being a bit sneaky, said, "Well, you sell me your birthright, you sell me your inheritance as the eldest son, and I'll give you some of my soup." And Esau, being in a famished kind of, non-coherent state because he was just hungry, said, "Well, I'm going to die anyway from starvation. So what good is a birthright to me?" So he exchanges his birthright for a meal. Is old. Through some deception, Jacob tricks Isaac into giving him the blessings that belong to the firstborn, and Esau misses out. And I suppose in those days, blessings weren't just like, "Achoo, bless you," or like, "God bless" at the bottom of every Christian email. It was actually something quite significant, so almost like a prophecy or something that would be the generation. So because of that, Jacob is the one who eventually was blessed, and through the three promises were going to be fulfilled through rather than Esau. Okay, so Jacob's other name was actually Israel. Okay, so Israel I know is a nation, but it's also actually a name of a man. So who were Jacob's two wives? Anybody?
I think one is it Hagar and Rebecca.
And,
Well, we've got Hagar up here, and we've already got Rebecca, so they're taken.
is it Leah and Rachel or something?
That's right, exactly. Leah and Rachel, and how were they related?
Google is correct.
That's good. I'm glad to know that someone's checking on me, not blaspheming here. Rachel and Leah were?
Sisters.
They were sisters, right, exactly. So Rachel and Leah were sisters, and a little bit of a twisted story. Jacob actually wanted Rachel, who was his uncle's daughter. So his uncle said, "Work for me for 7 years and I'll give you my daughter." So Jacob diligently works for 7 years, and on his wedding day, he actually gets Leah, who was the older sister. So he was tricked. Remember that Jacob actually tricked his father into giving him the blessing. So it's been a bit sort of payback of his own medicine, I suppose. So Jacob then has to work another 7 years to get Rachel, who he actually loved. So poor Leah was, the one that was sort of given away because she sort of had to. And then they were fruitful and had sons. So who were the sons of Jacob? Can anyone tell me? I'll give you a clue. There were 12 of them.
Okay, well that would be
One's Joseph.
Reuben.
Yep. Perfect.
Dan.
Yep.
Judah. Simeon.
Judah.
Who's this?
Yep.
Don't know.
Simeon,
Dan.
Levi,
Good.
Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Asher, oh, I can't pronounce that. Good old
Isaac, I think.
good old
can't say
Zebulun. Good old, my good old
Zebulun,
mate
yep.
Zebulun.
Yep. Is that 12 of them? Oh, we're missing one of them. The youngest one.
Benjamin.
Easy name to pronounce. Benjamin.
Good old Ben.
Benji. All right. Cool. So by his two wives, and actually, to be honest, they're two servants as well. They're also very twisted stories. He has 12 sons. So these 12 sons eventually, not yet, have children, and they become then the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, so when we talk about 12 tribes of Israel, they're actually just, and the names of the tribes are actually just names of people of their sons. Okay. At this stage, they're just is Israel. Okay. So, but before they became the 12 tribes of Israel, they were just the sons. I suppose out of all of them, Joseph is the kind of more prominent one. Okay. What is Joseph known for?
He's a dreamer.
He's a dreamer. Yeah. And
His coat.
his technicolor, multicolored dream coat, exactly. So
Able to
he had
interpret dreams.
that's right. So he dreamt, and he dreamt that he would one day be powerful, and told his brothers, "Hey, apparently one day I'm going to rule over all you guys," even though he was one of the younger ones. The brothers aren't happy about this. They're pretty jealous. Jacob loves Joseph the best, makes him a multicolored, technicolored dream coat, which incites the brothers to more anger, and they decide that they're going to kill him. Reuben, I suppose, is a little bit more compassionate, being the older brother, and says, "Hey guys, let's not kill him. Let's sell him off to make some money, because if we kill him, we won't make any money from that." So they decide to sell him to some passers-by, a caravan of, I suppose, gypsies or whatnot, and Joseph actually ends up in Egypt. He as a slave there. He actually does really well and works his way all the way up into the Pharaoh. So the Pharaoh is the king, into the Pharaoh's chambers, I suppose. And he's basically 2IC to the Pharaoh. So he's in position, a really high up position there. And because he can interpret dreams, and in those days, dreams were not just like, oh, I had a dream about, love and whatnot, but actually, again, have some sort of power in foretelling the future. Joseph is able to help them prepare for famine, and then save them through the famine by storing up adequate storage of maize and foods and things. So Joseph does really well. Meanwhile, the rest of the 11 brothers and the father are kind of starving in their own country, and they actually end up going to Egypt. And because of Joseph, they're welcomed in, and they all live there. So they actually all these end up in Egypt. Okay. Now, what happens in Egypt? They do so well. They're very fertile. They're very fruitful, and they multiply and multiply, and they become a really big nation. Okay. And because they become so numerous, they then pose a threat to the Egyptians and to the Pharaoh, because they're such a great people and a large nation. Does anyone want to interject or add anything at this point?
Yeah, can you hear me better this time?
Yeah.
That's good. I think it's good to know how long it took. Who was it? When he was in jail before he became 2IC, that would be a process. The guy that got sold off from his brothers, and he was ready, and he'd spent time with God in that prison cell, and then he was humbled to become 2IC. He got promoted by God.
That's right. So he wasn't just someone who, was born a star. Like, he had to go through that refining process, through a lot of hardship to bring him to where he was.
Yeah.
That's
like, when we pass our test, we get our promotion.
Yeah, that's right. And more
to
responsibility. That's right. Yeah, and he was used for that purpose, for essentially saving his family from the famine, so they could become a big nation. Okay, so now I'm just going to read this to you, or actually get someone to read this. This is Exodus 1. Erin, are you able to read for us? Verses
No,
1.
if I start talking, I can't actually see it.
Okay, no, you
Right.
can't. Okay, that's all right. Can anyone else do that or not?
Yeah, I can. What is it? Which one are we?
Okay, so verse 1 to 6.
To 7. 1 to
6.
7. Sorry, 1 to 6.
Oh, 7. Sorry, 7.
7 to
Yeah,
7. All right. Oh, okay. These are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob, each with his family. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin. Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. The descendants of Jacob outnumbered 70 in all. Joseph was already in Egypt. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died, but the Israelites were fruitful and multiplied greatly and became exceedingly numerous. So that the land was filled with them.
That's right. Exactly. So you can see that, from those brothers came a great nation. Does anybody remember the 3 promises that we talked about just before? What was the first one?
Nation, people.
Nation.
Nation, the people.
That's
The land.
That's right.
Land and blessing.
That's right. Nation, land, and blessing. Okay, so we have fulfilled the first one at the moment, right? Because they've become a great nation. They don't have any land, but they actually they've got a nation. And in fact, they're so numerous that they pose a threat to the Egyptians. Yeah. So look out for the step where we reach the land. Okay. Usually I'd have chocolates to throw the people, but I suppose they'll just bounce off my screen today. Okay. So Pharaoh, the new Pharaoh, who doesn't know who Joseph is, puts them in slavery to try and control population control. And in fact, he goes more than that. He tries to kill off all the baby boys when they're born, so that they can't grow strong and they can't sort of have an uprising against them. One of those boys that is caught up in all of those, Egypt slaves, okay, that is caught up in all of those is their first great leader. Who was the Israelites' first great leader? Prince of Egypt?
Moses.
Moses, that's right. So Moses was, I guess, their great leader. He started off as a baby boy, under a death sentence, essentially. Instead of being thrown into the river, his mum tried to hide him in a basket and put him on the river to float away. He floats all the way down the Nile, and where does he end up? In the palace of the king, because the princess who was down by the river saw this little basket, picked it up. Oh, there's a baby inside. Adopts him as her own and raises him, and so he becomes a prince of Egypt, even though he's actually an Israelite. So he again is in the palace of the Pharaoh, similar to Joseph, but God uses that and uses again his training and his hardships and time in the desert, which we don't have time to talk about, to make him into the leader that he wants him to be, to let God's people go out of Egypt. Okay, so how does he do this? It's Moses versus Pharaoh. Moses goes up to him and says, "Hey Pharaoh, can my people be please released from slavery because we need to go and worship God in the desert?" Pharaoh's not very sort of agreeable to this idea. So Moses says, "Well, God's gonna do stuff to you to make you release the Israelites." What does God send on the on the Egyptians to make them?
Oh, heap of plagues.
That's right. So he sends 10 plagues. Okay. So at this point in time, some of you may be familiar with the plagues, maybe others not. We're going to have just a short interlude and we're going to have a little game of charades. Okay. And I've got a couple of volunteers to act
We
out.
found your new calling. You're like a teacher. You need to be one of those fun, interactive teachers.
Well, this is your 2 minutes of fun, and then we can get back to the lecture. So enjoy it, guys. So first up, we have Jeff, who is going to act out for us one of the plagues, and you guys are going to have to guess which plague he is acting out for us. Go on, Jeff.
Well, firstly, I did volunteer. So volunteer me. So just so just for those who haven't played charade for a while, like me, how to just remind myself of how to play. So first thing you do is you share with people how many words. So how many words?
1 word.
And the second clue you give is the number of syllables.
5.
1.
Okay, 1 word, 1 syllable.
Okay.
All right, they're the clues. All right, the rest of the act out.
You've got to act it out.
Frogs.
Yeah. Well done, guys.
Well done, Jeff. Jeff, when I asked Jeff to like if he could do that, I think, hey, can I ask you a favor? And Jeff says, "Is it dangerous?" So I'm glad you haven't broken anything in that process. Thank you, Jeff, for our entertainment.
Yeah. Got a strain on my tongue now.
Okay. lucky Allied Healthcare is now open so that you can go and see your preferred medical professional. Okay. Erin has got the next one.
Yes, just like you, Jeff, I also did not volunteer. But happy to help. Okay, I'll follow your lead, Jeff. So
3 words.
4 syllables.
yes, perfect.
3 words.
Hang on.
Nay, nay, nay.
Wild animals. No.
Horse. It's like a horse that's
Livestock.
Words.
Yes, yeah, you're onto it.
Wild animals or something.
Yeah, cow.
Wait, how many words?
Is this enough? 3 words.
Dead
And I
livestock?
need the exact words there, Esther.
I've
Okay.
heard it. No, I'm not really. I've heard it.
Dead livestock? Death.
Death.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Woo! Good job, guys.
Not that.
Perfect. Okay, so yeah, well, I think we should be the Christian backpackers and actors. That would be pretty, get way more members that way. Okay, so we have death of livestock. We have frogs. What are the ones that you guys can remember without using Wikipedia?
Something about fish.
Maybe where the fish are swimming.
Or sea turned red or something.
Yep. So something turned red. It wasn't quite the sea. It was the
River.
Nile.
yeah. Nile turned to blood. That's right. River of blood. What are the other
Lice.
plagues?
Lice.
Lice. I think they were locusts actually.
Yeah,
Locusts, yeah.
Boils,
Boils. Good.
death of the firstborn.
That's right. Death of the firstborn. That was the last one. Talk about in a second. Darkness. Yep. What others? Seven.
Hail.
Hail. That's right.
Flies.
That's right. There's flies. Yep. Oops. Flies. Yep.
Gnats.
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 So yeah, the insects were a real problem in those days, weren't they? So you have the 10 plagues, which God periodically sends on the Egyptians, but not the Israelites, to pressure Pharaoh into letting them go, and also I guess showing the display of his power. The last, as Vit said, was the death of the firstborn. So God said to, I guess actually everybody, not just the Egyptians, that on a particular night the angel of death would pass through and kill the firstborn out of every household. Okay, but the only way that the sons of Israelites would be saved was if they killed or they sacrificed a lamb, and it had to be a perfect lamb. Okay, so not one that was going to kind of die anyway in the next 2 hours, like one that was fit and healthy. They had to sacrifice a lamb that was healthy and not unblemished. Yep. And they would smear the blood on the doorways of their houses, and as the angel passed through, he would see the doorway smeared with blood, and he would pass over those houses and save the firstborn. This is where we get the Jewish festival of Passover, okay? Because the angel of death passed over those houses. So what happens? It happens as God said. The firstborns of the Egyptians died, including Pharaoh. That's the last straw for him. He says, "Get out of here, you guys. I'm done with you. Go away." And the Israelites are able to pack all their things really fast and make a run for it and leave. Moses is their leader. He's leading them. He leads them through the Red Sea in another sort of miraculous event, and into the desert, essentially. So this is sort of our list of things to remember for later. Cool. We're up to. Okay, so the purpose of them being free was so that they could worship God and also get to their land. What was the name of the land that they were going to? Does anybody?
Canaan.
Canaan?
Yeah.
Canaan?
Yes.
They left
Yeah.
great riches, actually, which was told to Abraham in the covenant, and it was also said in the Passover verses in Exodus. They took all of the wealth that they lost in slavery, and it was given back to them at the end when they exited Egypt. Lots of gold and silver.
That's right. The Egyptians sort of, said, get out of here and take our riches with you. So it wasn't, they weren't kind of fleeing like refugees with just the clothes on their backs, essentially. They actually were casting off a lot of gold and riches. And I suppose that's kind of, it's a bit ironic, but it's also kind of God showing his abundance and his blessing, in saying he could go above and more than what they could expect, that's thanks, James. So Canaan, they're off to a land called Canaan. Oh, you guys can't see that. There we are. It's also called like the Promised Land. Okay. On the way, they stop at Mount Sinai. Okay. And at Mount Sinai, God gives the 10 Commandments to Moses. Okay. And I know we had a study on the 10 Commandments, I think last month. While Moses is up the mountain getting the 10 Commandments, the Israelites sort of go a bit astray. They think, oh, geez, what's happened to our leader? He's been up there for a while. He's probably dead. God's probably dead. We need to make our own idols to worship because that's what we do. We're sinful. And so Moses comes down and finds them worshipping golden calves. They've probably melted all the gold that they got from Egypt and turned them into idols. As you can imagine, Moses is not pleased about this. God's not pleased about this. And so they end up being punished for this. Moses breaks the tablets with the 10 Commandments on them. He has to go back up the mountain, get them again, and give the laws to the people. And just so you know, to put it into context, this happened in 1445 BC. I didn't pull it off the top of my head. And in 1400 BC, so pretty much around the same century, Chinese literature was established. So this is all happening in kind of the context of, this happening in sort of the Middle East. In China, they were starting to, write things and create their scripts and things like that. Okay. So a section of the laws, a lot of the Old Testament is filled with laws, and sometimes we think, man, why do we need like chapters and chapters of laws and then have them repeated over and over again? Why is God giving them so many laws? That sounds really legalistic. I suppose we need to remember that God is making a nation for himself. So he's a holy God. He's got, the ways that he wants people to live for their own benefit and for his glory. And he wants them to be a holy nation. And they've been slaves in Egypt. So they, don't really have any traditions or much culture or anything. They've just been subjected to the Egyptian way of life. So here God is teaching them how he wants them to live as his chosen people. Okay, and it's quite important to understand because we can get really bogged down in the laws sometimes, and we can get really bored and then switch off when we read them. But I suppose we must learn to look sort of beyond the laws. We must say, like, who's giving these laws? Why is he saying them that to them? And what do these laws tell us about God? In our studies, we've been asking, what does this passage tell you about God? I think it's the same thing. What do these laws tell us about God? What do these laws tell us about humans and our ability and tendency to err or to sin or sort of slide away? And how can, we apply them to our lives? There are moral and cultural laws. So some of them are, like the 10 Commandments, don't kill, don't steal, don't take your neighbor's wife. Those are moral laws. Some of them are cultural, like, the priests must wear this colored tassels, and, you must, have these spices. And when you prepare goats, you must do it in a certain way. That was to set them aside and apart from some of the other pagan nations, culturally. But because we don't really eat goats nowadays or wear tassels, those ones aren't the moral laws that we need to apply. So probably another Bible study in itself, but just a mention about the laws. But they don't, in the end, obey the laws. And as a consequence, their entry into the promised land, into Canaan, is delayed by how long? How long did they wander around? How long was their roadblock up for in that sense? You guys know?
It's a long
Wasn't
time.
it 40 years or something?
Wasn't it 40 years or something? Yeah.
40 years, so like a whole generation. They wandered around in the desert to kind of let that generation die off before they could enter in. But in that time, God gives them instructions to build a tabernacle. So James mentioned that before, a tabernacle, which was like a tent, a meeting tent where God would meet with the people. Cool. So I'm going to actually just take like a 5-minute break, I think, to feel free to like go get a drink or have a chat or whatnot. I'll just we'll do that. I reckon we've done pretty good in terms of covering quite a few centuries. Any questions that you want to sort of poke up at this stage?
I guess it's good to remember that there was 40 years in Moses' life. The point that he grew up in Egypt's Pharaoh's house, and then he realized he didn't want to be in Pharaoh's house. That was a lot to give up. And, then when he was exiled for 40 years, and then, when he came back, he was finally ready. He was 80 years old. And then he said, "Let my people go." And I guess he knew who the Pharaoh was because he used to live in his house, which is really funny. You see that in The Prince of Egypt.
Mm.
Yeah.
How many of you guys have seen that movie? Did you guys see that movie growing up? Or as an adult?
10 Commandments.
What's the movie called?
Prince of Egypt.
Prince of Egypt.
Oh, the cartoon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really, really good, I guess, a kind of formative cartoon.
Yeah, he lived till he was 120. Strong man.
Moses?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Yeah. Pretty
Yeah.
hard work leading all the grumbling Israelites.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just going to stand up for.
All right, we're back in 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's cool. Let's go for 5 minutes and then, or 3 minutes or whatever now. Much going on for you, Jodie, at the moment?
I'm not very
Quiet.
Yeah, no, it's very quiet.
Pretty quiet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not much happening.
It's not
Whereabouts
pumping
do
up
you
a little
live,
bit now
Jodie?
that things are open?
Oh, yeah, a little bit, but not noticeable. And now this thing about the cleaning last night's probably going to scare everyone as well. So I don't know if you saw the boss of Metro was getting money on the side, so they've sacked him on the side. Yeah, because him and the V-Line. Well, the V-Line guy was known for doing it, and now the Metro guy's done it too. So people will think the trains aren't clean. So, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Whereabouts are you working, Jodie?
I'm at
Are you in one of the train offices?
Yeah, I'm at Ferntree Gully tonight. Yeah, and at the station. Yeah, so it's, I go all round. Yeah, but, yeah. So I don't know. I still catch the trains. They're all right, I think. But yeah, just not many people are. And we can't go over 25 kilometres anyway, so it's not really very good yet.
And how was your week, Paula? Oh, I think you're still on mute. Paula, you trying to?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm okay, thank Thank you. Yeah, just busy week with the children, but good. Just really tired.
Mm.
But yeah, not too bad. Thanks.
Who's been to the
How
shop?
about you?
I was just going to say, has anyone been shopping?
No, I work at a kindergarten, so it is pretty busy at the moment with the children,
Yeah.
and got two groups together. So instead of having 18, 17 children, we have 25, 28, which
Why is that?
my-
Is that because there's not enough for the two groups, or? Oh.
it is because I work for a council, and management decided that during the time that was high COVID to have like a work bubble. So the other kindergarten came to our center, and kind of two groups of kinder children kind of joined together. So so makes it, even if there's other teachers with me and all that, it still makes it busy. But we're hoping that now that things are much better, then this decision gets reviewed.
How do you social distance those children? Impossible.
Yeah, I like what I do, and even the children from the other kinder, when they go back, I'm gonna miss, everyone. But in a day, it gets really busy, loud, and different. It's the dynamics change. Those who need more support kind of get the support as strong as probably will be. Anyway, it just changes the whole dynamic. So yeah, it's just been interesting to see how different places manage the situation, and how where I work, it's been managed this way. And yeah, but we made it through the week. Everyone went one piece.
Whereabouts are you based? Are you in Melbourne?
I'm in Melbourne, yes.
Whereabouts in Melbourne are you covering?
I'm in Windsor, and I work for the city of Port Phillip.
Oh, okay. Oh,
yeah. Melbourne.
Where are you in Melbourne? Is it Kaylee?
Kelly? Yeah.
Kelly, sorry, I haven't got my glasses on now. Oh, they're up here. That's okay.
Yeah, I'm in Melbourne. Yeah.
In Melbourne, yeah. Is anyone not
in Footscray?
Oh, in Footscray, okay. Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
And you, Jodie?
I actually live at Ferntree Gully. I'm walking to work this week.
Oh, wow.
I work
nice.
in Melbourne. Yeah, but it's lovely. I walk around like at 1 a.m. and there's no one around. It's just beautiful, really quiet. And
oh, nice.
Wow.
Yeah. I used to walk around the middle of the street, and it's just an amazing feeling. I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, that's cool.
God, some people would be scared, I'd say.
There more people catching train today?
No, not really.
Yeah.
It's still pretty quiet. Yeah.
Do you reckon everyone's driving more? Because the roads were pretty busy today.
I think so.
Yeah.
Driving, yeah.
I'm very close to work. It's like 15 minutes, and now I have to leave like half an hour earlier.
Oh, really?
Big. And it's just here from Windsor to South Melbourne. It's literally during the stage 4 like strong lockdown.
Yeah.
It was 10 minutes. Now, and it's not only the traffic, but to find parking and all that, it takes longer because there's more.
Yeah, because it.
I reckon the traffic's back to normal. I couldn't even cross the road. I rode my bike today and I couldn't get across the road. It was so long.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. Which is a good thing. It's a really good thing, but it's just we got spoiled with
Can't complain too much.
No, not at all.
That's right. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Alrighty, let's get going again before we run out of time. So, the Israelites are in the wilderness. They've had the laws, and they're on their way to Canaan, or the Promised Land. One group of people I wanted to mention was the priests. Okay, so the priests were there to serve the people, and they were to serve the people as mediators between God and man. Does anyone want to tell me which tribe the priests came from?
Levi.
That's right. The priests came from the tribe of Levi. So I'm just not. Mediators between God and man. Okay. They performed sacrifices on behalf of the people for their sins. So because people were sinful and they couldn't approach God because of that, an animal would be killed, and God would pour out his anger on the animal instead of the people and grant the people forgiveness. And since people were always sinning, the priests pretty much had a full-time job as sort of butchers, I suppose. And that's how people were able to approach God, with blood. It seems like God's like a gory and a very bloodthirsty God, but actually in those days that he wouldn't have been viewed like that. It was actually the norm. To please the gods, you would have to offer a sacrifice or do something. And actually the other nations would sacrifice much more than just animals. They'd actually sacrifice their own children to be able to atone for their sins or appease their sins. But that was not God's way of doing things. Yeah, so that's something to just note down, the priests. And if we go back to our little family tree here, okay, so you see all these 12 tribes. We talked a little bit about Joseph and then the Levites, okay? The Levites here were the priests, okay? Cool. So who was the leader that succeeded Moses?
Joshua.
That's right. So after Moses, you had Joshua, okay? And his trusty side, Caleb. And Joshua was the one that actually led them into the promised land or into Canaan. So they fought a series of battles where Israel was always the underdog. You know, they were always, you know, if you were betting, you would bet that they would lose, but God in his miraculous powers enabled them to succeed and overpower those nations and finally enter in. To Canaan. So they're in the great nation, and now they're in the promised land of Canaan. Okay.
Jesus just another version of Joshua, the word.
I actually think so, like Yeshua and Joshua, right? Yeah, very similar, and I think they mean the same thing.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's Yasu's the word, and it became Jesus in Aramaic.
Because I think both of them means God saves. Because I think Joshua means God saves, and Jesus does as well. You're right. Yes. So in all these, you know, I suppose Jesus is kind of, well, Joshua is sort of a foreshadowing of Jesus. So God brings. So they're living now in the land. Okay. Do we want to stop here and go back to our 3 promises?
Yeah.
What were our 3 promises?
Yeah, nation, the land, and the blessing.
That's right, exactly. So let's go back to here, okay? So the great nation first, then God's brought them into this land, okay? And the third one still to be, that's a bit more vague, but it's still to be fulfilled. Very good. Okay. Let's see. So the people live in the land. The priests continue to be spiritual leaders and perform sacrifices. Then they have judges, okay? They have a series of judges, which I suppose acting kind of like they're the leaders of the nation and leaders in war and injustice. And this is all fine until the people decide that they want a king. And the problem is that God is actually their king. God has said, I'll be your king. But they want a human king. And God says that a human king will oppress them, but the people don't care. They just want a king to be like the other nations. So God gives them over to their desires and he gives them a king. Who was the first king of Israel?
Good old Saul.
Saul, okay.
Good old mate Saul.
King Saul, good. So he wasn't a terrible king, but he wasn't a great king either. Yeah, so, you know, he did all right. Saul's successor, who was Saul's successor? Wasn't his son. Saul's son was Jonathan. But who was the next king of Israel after Saul?
Right, David.
That's right, David. That's right. He even has a star named after him. Star of David. You know, the Jews all sort of identify with that. So Saul's successor as king was David. Now, David was much more of a better king than Saul. He wasn't perfect. What book in the Old Testament did David write?
Psalms.
Psalms. So that's right. So Psalms. A lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them can be attributed to Psalms. Very good. So who was David's son? Who succeeded David as king?
Solomon.
That's right, Solomon. Now, Solomon was a little bit of an illegitimate child. David, one day he was meant to be at war, and he wasn't at war, and he saw a lady called Bathsheba, having a bath on the roof, as you do, and he decided he wanted her, took her into his palace, slept with her. The result was Solomon, and then David had to kind of try and cover everything up by killing or having Bathsheba's husband killed in battle so that he could take her into his harem. So not good at all. He was told off for this, I suppose, but his son became Solomon, and he was the one that actually succeeded David as king. And the people lived really well under Solomon. Oh, what book did Solomon write? Or what books did Solomon write, actually?
Ecclesiastes.
Ecclesiastes? Sorry, there's a few other people speaking there.
Song of
And
Did somebody say song?
Song of Songs, yeah.
Song of Songs? Yeah.
Is it
And
still
one more?
Proverbs?
Proverbs, very good. Proverbs, okay. So Solomon was known, what was Solomon known for, actually?
His wisdom.
Solomon was known for his wisdom, that's right. Is he known for anything else?
He built the temple.
That's right, so he built the temple. So remember that they were worshipping in the tabernacle, which was like a tent in the desert, which they could pack up and move away. Now, because they were in the land and they were established, God said, okay, now you can build a temple. He gave instructions for it, where they would offer the sacrifices, where God would dwell with the people and kind of be that sort of meeting place. So not quite the equivalent of a church, but sort of a holy space. So yes, Solomon built the temple, exactly. So under Solomon, the nation of Israel really prospered. God blessed them a lot. They were very prominent amongst all the other nations, and they were actually a blessing to the other nations, and other nations would come to them and really learn from them and everything. So heading back to there was peace, and there's peace all around them for a period of time. So we're bringing back to our promises. Okay, so we've got the nation, we've got the land, and now we have like the blessing that God will bless them, and they'll be a blessing to the nations around them. Okay, so great. That's good. Ticked all the boxes. Woohoo! But doesn't last for very long. So the other thing I suppose that Solomon was known for was, his downfall was maybe the downfall of many men, and that would be wives. That would be women. Okay, so Solomon loved women. Many of them, and because he could, he took lots of wives, as was common in those days. And I think I read this morning he had 700 wives
And concubines.
And 300 concubines, something like that. So a lot. And he took these wives from lots of different nations, and not just from Israel, which God had warned him not to do, because he said, your wives will turn your hearts away from me. And they did. So Solomon, even in all his wisdom, fell into all the sin because of the woman he chose to take in with him. So everything kind of turns to custard after that. After Solomon, there's a whole lot of kind of mostly bad kings. There's, I guess, one or two okay ones, bad kings, and the kingdom actually crumbles. Okay, so the kingdom splits into two. So let's just do another little. Okay, so you've got the nation of Israel. Okay, so under Solomon, or after Solomon, it splits into the north and the southern kingdom. Okay, and the northern kingdom is often called Ephraim. Anybody know who Ephraim was? We haven't actually talked about this.
Is that like Judah?
Sorry, the other one was Judah?
I thought that might have been Judah, and I'm not sure.
Ephraim? Ephraim wasn't actually Judah. The south was actually known as Judah.
Oh.
Yeah. So that was one of the tribes, or the sons.
Joseph's son?
That's right. So Ephraim was actually one of Joseph's sons. So they actually became, that's right. So Joseph had two sons, and they came two sort of half tribes, which we won't talk about. But Ephraim was actually Joseph's son. So kind of like the tribe of Joseph, kind of. Ephraim was also known as Samaria. the city, okay, which actually was the capital. Okay, and that's important to know because that often is when you're reading like the you, O Ephraim, or the Lord says to Samaria, this will happen. And there's actually all referring to the same thing, the northern kingdom of Israel. Okay. What was the capital of Judah? Which city? Very common city, very well-known city, even exists to this day. What was that, Andrew?
I was going to say Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, that's right. So Jerusalem.
That was just a guess.
No, good guess, good guess. Jerusalem was the capital, okay, of the south. Now, remember, what story did Jesus tell, or what parable did Jesus tell? That's really famous.
The Good Samaritan.
That's right, the Good Samaritan. So actually, Jesus was mainly in Judah and Jerusalem. That's where he was crucified, everything like that. The Jews in Jerusalem viewed themselves as pure Jews, and they did not like the Jews or the people, their brothers, in Samaria or Ephraim because they thought they were intermarried and not pure. And so they had a rivalry with Samaria, the capital there. So when people talk about the Good Samaritan, it was kind of like Samaria wasn't a good place. They weren't good people. They didn't like them. So yeah, that's what Jesus is referring to. Good. Okay. So the way that it's split is there's 10 tribes here. Okay. 10 tribes come on this side, and then there's Judah and Benji. They're the 2 tribes, and they make up the southern kingdom. So it is kind of unevenly split. Okay, what happens to these 2 kingdoms after that? The whole lot of kings, both kingdoms don't obey God, and then as a punishment of this, God lets them be conquered by surrounding nations. Okay, so let's look at this. So at this point, you need to remember A, B, C. Okay. Vis, I'm just going to put you on. Oh, but do you mind just muting yourself? I think you've got a bit of background noise coming through. Vis, if you could just pop yourself on mute, that'll be awesome. Cool. So A stands for Assyria. Okay. So Assyria is one of the surrounding nations. They conquer the northern kingdom in 722 BC. Okay, they are conquered. Now, just as a point of reference, in 776 BC, so in the same century, that was the first known date of the Olympic Games. Okay, so it's not recent, but it's not in the ice, so long ago. Yeah, it was around the time of the first Olympic Games that Assyria conquered the northern kingdom. All right, B stands for Babylon. Okay, the Babylonians conquered Judah, or the southern kingdom, in 586 BC. Okay, and in kind of context, in 563 BC, so 20 years within that time, Buddha was born in India. So that was the start of Buddhism, or I suppose when Buddha did his thing. So yeah, Buddha was born in India. Which Old Testament character sort of is well known and associated with the Babylonian sort of empire? Does anybody want to know? It's really famous because of some lions.
Daniel.
Yeah, so Daniel. So Daniel was around the time of the Babylonian the empire. They called it the time of the exile because what the Babylonians did was to actually take all the Jews, or a lot of them, out of Judah and actually bring them to Babylon. So they were sort of exiles there. Okay, and then C stands for Cyrus of Persia. So it actually is Persia, but that just makes a nice acronym. Okay, so Cyrus was one of the kings of Persia. Persia conquered Babylon in, let's see, I think it was 539 BC. Okay. And around the same time, Confucius was born. So the Chinese philosopher Confucius was born around that time. Okay. So then the Persian Empire took over the Babylonians. Which important female character need we mention in the time of the Persian Empire? One that I would have particular interest in? Esther, right. So Queen Esther Esther was actually, she was a Jew, and she was the queen. She made us, God elevated her to being the queen of Persia. Okay, so Esther was around the time of the Persian Empire. So Cyrus was one of the later kings, and he actually let the exiles, the Israelites, go back to Jerusalem. So they went back to Jerusalem, and who led their passage back to Jerusalem? You have Ezra. And from Babylon back to Jerusalem and started to rebuild the temple and then rebuild the walls. So one of our Bible studies that Kelly led a few weeks ago was on Nehemiah, and that sort of puts it in context, where Nehemiah was serving the king of Persia. He heard that the walls of Jerusalem had been still ransacked, and he wants to go back and build the wall, which he did. Okay, it's interesting to know, if you guys want to look at your Old Testament contents, if you've got them there in front of you, Ezra and Nehemiah, they come quite early on in your table of contents. Yeah, they're like sort of in the first half of the Old Testament. They come way before Psalms and Proverbs, which are written by David and Solomon, who were way earlier. So the Old Testament is not necessarily in chronological order. It's actually a bit of there's an order, but it's not chronological order. Okay, so yeah, you've got this, you're almost at the end, but you've got these books kind of at the beginning, which is interesting to note. Okay, so during this time we have prophets. Okay, so prophets serve to bring messages from God to the people. So often they're saying, hey, turn back to God, you guys are real sinful, we need to to listen to God, otherwise we're going to get kicked out of our land, which happened. Okay, or they bring messages of hope. So hey, even though we've been conquered by our surrounding nations, God still loves you. Hold on to hope, because God will restore you. He'll provide you with a leader to save you. He'll rescue you, and he'll bring you freedom. So the prophets bring the message of God. What are some of the prophets that you remember from the Old Testament, or you can identify? Who are some of the prophets?
Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel.
Yeah. Okay. Hang on. Okay. That's right. God, Ezekiel. Yeah. Anybody else? What are the prophets? Any others? Jeremiah. Oh, yeah, got that there. Anybody else? Any other prophets you can think of? So Nathan doesn't have a book after him, but Nathan was a prophet to King David, who told him that his sin with Bathsheba was not good. Okay.
Elijah.
That's good. Elijah. You remember the stories of Elijah and then his successor Elisha. Okay. So many of the Old Testament books are actually prophets. So some of them are to the northern kingdom, some of them are to the southern kingdom, and some of them are after in this time of the post-exile, where they're going back. Yeah, cool. And so we're nearly there. This is not, I suppose, in the Bible, but it is predicted. So after the empires of Assyria, Babylon, and Persia, you have Greece. Okay. So Greece conquers Persia in 331 BC. Okay, and then the last empire, the Great Empire. Who was the last great empire after Greece? What was that?
Romans.
The Romans. That's right. The Romans were around in the time of Jesus, weren't they? And they ruled from 146 BC to 476 AD. Okay, so these are kind of the empires that kind of succeeded, and this is all in history. So even if you don't look in church history or Old Testament history, you can find these in history books, and all the different characters and kings and things that that we know about. So basically, that's the start from Genesis all the way to the Romans. Okay, and just a little last section to to end, all through this, God was trying to get us back to fulfill those promises and get us back to Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And a lot of the prophets towards the end started saying, there's going to be a savior, there's going to be someone that's going to save you. So who was the savior that ends up coming?
Judas.
Jesus. That's right. That's right. Jesus was the one that was predicted all throughout of all of this, because there was, like James said, there's no perfect human that could really save them. So Jesus came actually from the tribe of Judah. So often he's called the Lion of Judah. Okay. Or he's actually from the house of David. He's David's ancestor. So often he's called the Star of David, the Son of David. Hosanna to the Son of David. Okay. He was kind of a disappointment for the Jews at the times, because they were expecting someone to come in and get rid of the Romans who had ruled with such a harsh hand and bring them back to Jerusalem where they could worship God in the capital, in their temple. That was their idea of a Messiah. But Jesus didn't do that. Jesus actually died, or the Romans killed him. So that's kind of a real big disappointment, because you're killed by your enemies. But he, as we know, he rose again. But Israel was still under Roman oppression. Jesus didn't do heaps about that, if anything at all. And if anything, there was even more persecution of the Christians by the Romans now. So we think of, the Christians in the early days were thrown to the lions. They were set alight for entertainment. They were, the gladiators, all those sorts of things. So Jesus didn't really do much politically. But that kind of wasn't God's plan. There was a bit of a misunderstanding, because when we think of God's overarching plan for the world, for history, here we have it here, okay? His plan was that he wanted to have these promises fulfilled. And he wanted them to be fulfilled not just temporarily, but actually permanently. So if we think of Jesus, okay, and how he does that, so by his death and resurrection and bringing together a bunch of Christians, the nation or the people, the new nation or new people that he's creating is actually Christians, okay? And this is a bunch of people that's not related genetically or geographically or from a family line, but actually from all over the world. We're sons and daughters of God, and that was God's way of creating a people. The land that Jesus brings us into is not a physical land, or I suppose it will be in the end, but he throws open heaven's gates for us. And then there'll be also a new heavens and a new earth that all of us are able to be in after this one, okay? And then the blessings that he unlocks for us is God's presence and our freedom from sin, okay? And that we can be a blessing to others, that we share the good news of all of what we've talked about and more with other people. And so we become a blessing to other people as well. So you have Christians, in new heaven and new earth, in God's presence. And look, this kind of resembles us getting back to Genesis 1 and 2, where you have creation with humans in a garden with God, in God's presence. So that's sort of the ends of the book, and why we make such an awesome, big fuss about Jesus. So I suppose, and then we look at this. So if you look at this section here, the Passover, we talked about a sacrifice, a lamb that was healthy and unblemished. I mean, these are reflected in Jesus as well. So he shed his blood for us. That was our sacrifice. We call him the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. Okay. And, they talk about him being unblemished. So he was the spotless lamb. So just like the lambs that were killed weren't allowed to have any sort of defect, Jesus was our spotless, sinless sacrifice once and for all. And he is the ultimate Passover lamb. He was actually also crucified at the time of Passover, and that was not a coincidence. Actually, Passover became the Lord's Supper, because they were the first Lord's Supper, communion, was actually a Passover meal. So, and that's also no coincidence as well. If you look at the prominent leaders in the history of Israel, we have the priests as mediators. Jesus is our mediator between God and man. He serves to offer those sacrifices. He is the sacrifice between God and man, so that we can dwell with God and have communion with God. Prophets were to speak God's message. Jesus spoke God's message and God's word to us. and ultimately he's our ultimate king, the perfect king, which all of these other kings failed to be. So I suppose in this, for me, it's really exciting, and I suppose that hopefully for you, you can see little bits of it where you see that Jesus actually isn't disconnected from the Old Testament. It's not like he just kind of randomly sort of drops onto the scene to save the world from their sins, even though he does. He's actually a continuation and the culmination of the Old Testament storyline of everything we've talked about today, of what God has been planning and doing for centuries and centuries prior. And I think, you know, when we study this and we understand this, we actually gain a much better understanding of Jesus, of what he's done and why it's important. And I think as long as we don't understand the Old Testament, or we don't try to understand the Old Testament, our understanding of Jesus is limited, because Jesus isn't disconnected from the Old Testament as well. He's actually a fulfillment of it. So let's go back and let's just go back to our characters here that we've brought up. Have we sort of put all of these kind of in place? Are there any of them where you're sort of a bit, you know, not sure about where they kind of, we haven't mentioned, or where we're not really sure where they were?
Samson, did we do Samson?
So who was Samson? Samson was one of the judges, okay?
Oh.
So Samson would have been, let's see, can you see here? Okay, so he would have been after Joshua in the time of the judges. Correct me if I'm wrong, people, and before the kings, yeah?
I'm sorry, but I better get going, guys. And
Okay, that's all right. Thanks, James.
Oh yeah, so
Okay.
thanks.
Thanks for your input.
Yeah.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Good
We'll just
overview.
that's all right. We'll just be a few more minutes, but feel free to log off if you need to. Anyone else with anything else where people want to know, or if you look in your Old Testament contents page, if you're like, oh, where did that go, or where's that been? You know, we can try and put them into these storylines. I think if you got any questions as well, guys, just feel free to type in the chat box, or just yell them out.
Oh, now you know how you went through the empires before. Is the Ottoman Empire in that, or that was afterwards? Because I've never even heard about it until the last month or so. How the Ottoman
that's a good question, Jodie. I'm actually not sure. So I don't want to answer you on that one. I have a feeling it's after the Romans, because you have the Ottoman, and the Byzantine and all those ones, but I'm not sure.
I'll look into that. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel it's later.
The Ottoman Empire was the last Islamic empire, so now it's not in the Old Testament.
Yeah, so I think it's much later. Yeah.
It was much later. Okay, yeah.
I think it's much later. Yeah. Have we covered everything in the Old Testament? I don't even have mine open. Next to me, are there any that sure they kind of where they go?
Esther,
Yes.
I have a couple of clarifications.
Yeah.
Is Hagar an Arab?
Good question. I suppose she was the mother, I suppose, of the Arabs. So probably the Arabs hadn't really been sort of invented or descended yet. So yeah, so I wouldn't say she's an Arab, but she was essentially the mother or the ancestor of the Arabs. Yeah.
So I wonder if there were Muslims during Hagar's
that time. They weren't
Yeah.
Muslims during that time, because Islam started with Muhammad.
Yeah.
And when did Muhammad live? Muhammad lived 600 years after Christ.
Yeah.
So 600 AD. So Islam definitely hadn't been invented. The Arabic people started from this time, but they were just Arabic people, and they had, I guess, their own religions and their own sort of what we would refer to as maybe pagan gods and things, but they definitely didn't have Islam, because the start of, the lead of Islam, or the inventor of Islam, if you like. Yeah. Just like there were no Christians at this time, because Christianity started with Jesus. There were only Jews.
I was wondering who were their gods or God. They
Yeah, good
worship.
question. I don't know, but if you read your Old Testament, you'll see lots and lots of gods that they worshipped. So there was Baal, who Elijah had a standoff with the prophets of Baal, and loads and loads of gods, many gods. Yeah.
The second thing is, was Jesus already present in the Old Testament?
I think that he's foreshadowed in terms we get clues of like who this Messiah might be, but physically no. So he was born of Mary and the Holy Spirit. So physically he came into existence as a human when he was born in the New Testament. But because he is part of God and essentially God, and so they say he was an agent in creation and around at the time. It's not like he just existed at Christmas. But he didn't exist in this human form. Probably a little bit above my pay grade to be explaining.
I would like to disagree
Thank you.
slightly on that, because I think the historic Christian point of view, beginning with the New Testament itself, is that Jesus is all over the Old Testament.
But you're a little bit fuzzy to hear, but you're saying that Jesus was around, he was present.
Jesus as the Son of God has existed forever, and he became incarnate as Jesus in 2,000 years ago. But the historical Christian point of view, and I think the New Testament itself, is that the Old Testament is about Jesus. It's just that it wasn't until the incarnation in the New Testament that was made clear.
So there's definitely, like, if you look back, you're not just like, oh, Jesus was an afterthought, that God's like, oh, actually now I've got it, Jesus is coming now, like, oh, because everyone else has failed. No, he was actually foreshadowed, especially in the Passover and the sacrifices and the temple and the priests, all those things. God had it in mind, but Jesus wasn't yet incarnate, so in a body, in a carnal form, until then. If you've got questions, just keep thinking. But actually, I wanted Waylon, when are you able to just promote a couple of books for us, just quickly?
Yeah. Yes, hold on. I'll just share my screen.
No, you can't, because I haven't made you able to share your screen. No, hang on. I can do that now if you want, though. Hang on, I'll just make you be able to do that.
Okay.
So it's not
Disable.
I don't know.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah, there it is. I think it's now.
Yeah, because it'll be better see them.
Yeah, the host. Yeah.
There we go. Cool. Can you see that? Coming through.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so just to promote a couple of books along the lines of what we've been talking about today. So the first one is a Jesus storybook. As you can see, I've done a bit of reviews because I haven't read the whole thing myself, but I've read bits and pieces of it. So it's more of a children's storybook. It's got some, good illustrations and good like narrative